And yes, we are live. I'm here with my new friend Alan. How are you doing, Alan?
Doing great. Happy to be here. Looking forward to some excellent conversation.
Yeah, so let's start off as I always do. I don't know if you've listened to my podcast at all, probably not, but I always ask the guest to go right back to the beginning, early childhood. What were the first impressions about, well, if you were raised religious, about God and church religion, and if you weren't, then your sort of first impressions about the philosophy or just the worldview that dominated the home, and then how you came into your own as you growed and matured and started thinking for yourself, and maybe you went down some strange rabbit holes in terms of belief systems. You may even have become a vegan at some point. I don't know, but just tell us all about it.
Awesome. Well, number one, thanks for having me here. I always start by telling people, my name's Alan. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a creative, and I'm forgiven. So when you ask about those beginning stages of my life, it starts from those first two parts of being a family person, right? So growing up with my mom and my dad in Northwest Florida. Um, my first recollections of faith would be growing up and going to church at the local AME church. We actually ended up becoming Lutheran later, but we started it after African Methodist Episcopal. Say that 5 times fast. And I was learning piano, and I was playing down in the basement and singing songs in the children's choir. And those are faint memories, but they are memories that I am very sure that my parents wanted to make sure that church was a foundation of our family. And then prayers at night, saying prayers around the bedside, or with my parents having, I don't remember exactly what the prayers were, but they were, I had to like lead them or memorize them. And so while I wouldn't say I was brought up in church in the ways like, somebody that was brought up on the pews or something like that, it has been a part of the fabric of my early childhood. So going on from there, yeah, I think that in confirmation, as I mentioned, is interesting to go from AME denomination to a Lutheran denomination. I think my father just found a place where he just wanted something more, I don't know,
High
solid
church,
in terms
high
of what he
church.
believed. And so I ended up getting confirmed at around 12 or 13 and learning all the catechisms and such and such. So that also formed the basis of my faith, of feeling like there was a solid thing that I had to know, some theology. Of course, I didn't know what theology back then, but understanding, it did kind of shape the way I look at the world. So if that, I don't know if that helps answer the
Yeah.
question in terms of the rabbit holes or things like that. But yeah, that was the basics of my Christian faith at the beginning.
You never strayed. You never became atheist, agnostic, angry at God because he didn't want you to do all the
Uh,
fun things. You know what I mean? During
I
puberty.
mean, angry at God, frustrated, questioning, sure, but never to the point that I questioned the existence of God, or just questioned whether I was doing it right, more or kind of just falling off the path. Um, and it sounds weird when you say it that way, because I mean, I think, the doubts I had, whether it be things about, creationism versus evolution or other things where there are issues of where we, how does the Bible talk about this? It was never that the Bible wasn't true. It was like, how am I interpreting this? How in a, learning about science, learning about math, learning about all these other things in school, I remember looking at a thing of dinosaurs and like, well, how does this fit? So I remember those days of
Mm.
trying to figure out how, the faith and my belief in God fit with these other modes and methodologies, but it never made me sour on the idea that there was a God, or that there was, that this was real, that I was following, that I had accepted Jesus. And yeah, like I said, the struggle was always internal. It was never external, where I thought that I was following down the wrong path.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you know this about me, probably not, but I'm a young Earth creationist. I believe the whole universe is like 7,000 years old or so. So
Cool.
I don't know. This is very rare for a Catholic to have this position, but that's the position that I came to just through my, well, I never, even as an atheist, I never believed that I was an ape. So whatever. But no offense to you if you do believe in
No offense
evolution,
at all.
but
I leave the door open. I definitely have not. I don't feel I have locked that down. To be
yeah.
honest with you, I ended up homeschooling my kids for a little while, and we went deep
Ah,
into some of the carbon dating stuff. I think it was Josh McDowell. Somebody, don't check your brains at the door, and he walks through all the creation versus all the different day age theories and all that kind of stuff.
okay.
So I remember looking into that, and I basically walked away with like, I'm not sure. Like I
Mm-hmm.
walked away with, there's evidence for God saying, hey, days like 1,000 years and all this kind of stuff. And then there was also evidence where I felt very strongly that if God wants to alter time, he can. If he wants to alter the speed of light, he can. And so the laws of nature are subject to the God of nature. And so I just figured, okay, well, I don't have an explanation for that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. I'm passionate about it just because I looked into it and more in terms of Catholic dogmas, and you're not into that angle because you're Lutheran, but I'm very interested to dig into the Lutheran stuff. But before we do that, I just want to ask about the siblings. I can't remember if you mentioned how many siblings you have.
I have two siblings. I have my brother and my sister. Yeah, I'm the oldest.
Is it okay to ask, like, are they Christian or do they do some wild path or what?
My That's a good question. My brother and sister did not follow as closely as I did. We all went to church together back in, and by the way, I won't consider myself Lutheran anymore. I'm now
Oh,
non-denominational. So
oh,
that's a
okay,
whole nother
okay, oh,
story.
okay,
I talked
okay.
about the early childhood.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
So later on, there's a bunch more twists in terms of
Ah,
my denominational path. But yeah, my brother and sister no longer, I would say, are practicing. My brother has, definitely still had like some spiritual kind of foundation, but definitely not a practicing in terms of like going to church every week or anything like that. So it kind of hurts a little bit because, my parents are still up there. They're all living in Northwest Florida. And yeah, sometimes I realize, okay, when, my sister is estranged. And again, it's one of those situations where the family was raised in a certain way, but you didn't see all of the fruit fall the way that we thought it would when you have this kind of foundation. And it shows that God, is great, is gracious and merciful, but you also got to make your own decisions as an adult. So, my parents are still firmly in the faith, and I thank God for them. And I still love my brother. Haven't don't really talk to my sister right now, and it's unfortunate. So it's kind of like one of those things where, yeah, I have to realize, hey, we have to take what we have, be grateful for that, but I can't wish or pray or yank my family, into the exact same path and the exact same beliefs.
yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, it's very difficult. I was the only one in my family who converted to Catholicism, and it's it's been awkward with family and friends and stuff like that.
Mm.
But and I just got a messy family situation to begin with. I won't get into that, and I'll try not to talk about that. But
You're not the only one.
it's messy. It's messy. But yeah, when it comes to like the God's eye view, when we look from God's perspective at all the mess since the fall of our first parents, and that's another reason why I'm excited to be a young Earth creationist. It gives me that proximity in time to the fall, of our first parents, and I like to picture them just after the fall when they're huddling and hiding from God in the bushes. You know what I mean? It's so cute, so innocent, like hiding from God is like, oh, and that's what we do today. We can laugh at Adam and Eve, but we do the same thing. Like we think we're hiding from God. It's like it's stupid. It's just
100%.
stupid. It's
Yeah, yeah.
stupid.
Because it's our instant reaction is self-preservation, and at the same time, the only one that can preserve us, like we're basically defenseless, as Eve proved, right? Without a defense system, without somebody to step in, she was deceived, and all of us at our own devices are basically like flying by the seat of our pants, trying to make sure that we have this ability to figure out what's right and wrong. And she wanted it, and of course Adam agreed, and we all do the same thing. But at some point, we all try to rely on our human wisdom, and as I'm sure Scripture says, that many other ways to seem right to a man, right? Seems right is a big word. Seems.
Because we
Seems has
wanted
got
to
a lot of us in trouble.
we want to try our way. Like I could do God's will, or I could do my will, and every time I do my will, it ends in disaster. But I'm gonna try it again. It's just like, I'm
Yes,
just gonna
like the
try it one
child.
more time. Let me try one more time doing my way, and maybe it won't end in disaster this time. It's like, hello. Can you
Yeah.
notice the pattern? Like, do God's way, but it's harder. It's harder to do God's will. Oh, God help us. So
Yeah,
what about the
man.
what about the wife? How'd you meet the wife, and what's she like?
Oh, that's a great question, and I love talking about her. She probably can hear me perking. Her ears are probably perking up and making sure I say everything right. Met my wife in college. I moved down here to University of Miami, down to South Florida. I moved there in '92, right before Hurricane
Ooh.
Andrew. Great timing, right? So 2 years later, after Hurricane Andrew finally was kind of we were recovering from all of it, she moved down and went to University of Miami as well. We met in a practice room. I was playing piano there. She was a singer, was brought in. She swears, I swear she was winking at me. She swears it was allergies. And and lo and behold, 2 years later, we were married. Did have one of those, like you said, kind of off the beaten path, not the right way to do it. Lived together for a little while, realized we need to get married, had a kid literally like right out the bat. So here I am, a married man with a child and a wife right out of school. And 27 years later, we've got 3 kids and we are still together. We are still blessed, and all 3 of them are either married or out of the house.
Ooh.
So yeah, things God has a weird sense of humor, and so what I started in the wrong way turned out very right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. God draws straight with crooked lines, as someone said somewhere.
Amen.
And yeah, I mean, he doesn't have much choice because he gave us free will, so it's gonna be crooked. It's gonna be crooked. But yeah, I mean, what do you say about the whole parallel between romantic relationship, the marriage of man and woman here below, and then that vertical dimension, that romantic relationship? We are the bride of Christ. The church is the bride of Christ, and so there's that romantic relationship, and we have to, Christ loves us, the church, as we love our wives. And what do you think about that? Is that a powerful element of your walk with Christ, that romantic relationship, that devotion, that commitment? Do you think about that often? Because that's something on my podcast I always talk about. It's like very important to me.
That's powerful. And I would say yes, absolutely, in terms of the word picture, right? Of the image of Christ and the bride, right? The bride of Christ being the church. And being in ministry for all this time, one of our pastor, right, has had a saying that, you don't mess with the bride. You don't, if you're the groomsman, right? You're not the groom, but you're the friend of the groom in terms of a minister. You're the friend of the groom. You're a friend of Christ. You don't you don't woo the bride. You don't try to get the bride to be on your side. You don't say, hey, take your eyes off of your groom and pay it. So it's very important in terms of my ego check, just like I want to protect my wife. And I never want to give her any reason not to trust me. I also don't want to give the church any reason not to trust me. And I had to take a lot of ego checks over the years in terms of saying, when, like you said, about what the Bible says, that that Christ died for the church, obviously, and that the love was that he died and sacrificed. And a lot of times I've realized I've had to sacrifice my own ego, really die to myself so that I could be a better man for my wife. So it's kind of like the parallel going the opposite sense, where the way Christ loved the church teaches me how to love my wife and how I should be loving my wife. And then the opposite, of course, realizing that the way I love my wife and the way I take care of my family informs the rest of the church and how I really love God. So if I'm mistreating my wife, I remember one time my pastor in a previous church called me out for speaking kind of harshly to my wife in public. And that was a very clear notice to me that, hey, am I really following God the way I say? If I'm going to mistreat the person he gave me that's closest to him, closest to me. So that was a wake up call. I'm still, learning. 20, 27 years in, I haven't mastered it at all, but I think that's what that relationship has taught me. The relationship between God and serving his church and serving my wife have been concurrently, where I am learning better and better how to be the right kind of husband and the right kind of servant in both respects, to his bride, the church, and to my bride, my wife.
Yeah, amazing. I just want to read you a little prayer, one of my favorite prayers. Okay, I do a lot of set prayers. That's
Sure.
kind of the Catholic way. You can make fun of us for this, but we have a lot of set
No
prayers.
one's
Okay,
making fun. No, they're all good here.
but it's one of my favorite prayers. I got many favorites, but this is one of my favorites. I pray it every day. Dear Lord, I do not know what will happen to me next. I only know that nothing will happen that was not foreseen by you and directed to my greater good from all eternity. I adore your holy and unfathomable plans and submit to them with all my heart for love of you, the Pope, and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Amen. So that Pope and Mary stuff, maybe you're not so hot on, but the rest of it's pretty cool in terms of like the plans of God and submitting to that, even though they're incomprehensible to us. So that's one of my favorites. So what are some of your reflections on that little prayer? It's a small prayer.
Oh no, I love the prayer, and absolutely, I think it brought up one of my favorite scriptures, which is from Psalms, and I'm gonna mess. Oh, the address I believe is 25:10, but it says that all the paths, and I always stop there and emphasize paths plural. All the paths of the Lord are full of mercy and truth to such who keep His commandments, and I've always loved that verse because it definitely describes me. Paths. And of course, there's only one way to God, and that whole thing. But on that way to God, there are a lot of paths that seem to be going which way and that way and sideways. And to me, what you just prayed or what just talked about is that not knowing what's next or not knowing what's one thing, but God is aware of it. Is this, I think you alluded to it, this mix of free will and our will. I mean, it's amazing that we're talking today because that was literally our sermon today, was that God's will obviously is there, but He also grants us our will. And then He doesn't say, oh, well, if you make a misstep out of my will, everything is, like I have no plan B's, you're toast. He said, my pastor said that His will and our will are synergized, that in a weird way, God's will needs our will. Because He basically said, hey, you're going to be part of what the angels one day will be singing about. These are the redeemed. We don't understand it. Angels don't understand it, but we understand we have a part to play. And so my will, in a way, is helping along, and it sounds totally, sacrilegious to say it, but I'm helping God's will by exercising it under the auspices of I'm following God, even when I don't know which way to go. And He's like, show me whichever left or right, I'm following you. Goodness and mercy shall follow you. And so sometimes I don't know the right path to take. You're right. Like when I got married to my wife, when I started God in gigs, when I switched churches, when I, did all these major changes, I didn't know for sure if it was going to work. I just had a conviction. I wasn't convinced, but I had a conviction. And so I had to follow conviction even when I wasn't confident. And so that to me is where you say, hey, God, whichever way I'm going, I'm not sure, but I'm going to trust you because, like you said, you have my best interest in heart. So I really love that, the sentiment behind that prayer.
St. Augustine's one of my favorite saints. I don't know if you've read much of him, but one of my favorites. He said many, many things that are worth looking at. But the one that comes to mind when you were speaking about, God's will, our will, and how grace and free will work together, it's he wrote a whole book on that and it references it many times. But one of the little things he said, one of the little pithy things he said, is that God created us without us, but He did not will to save us without us, which means that, we had no say in our creation. He created us. But when it comes to our salvation, we're participating. So He created us without us, but he did not will to save us without us. So it's God's will that we have will, and that our two wills will be synergized, as you said. So I thought that was a beautiful sort of way to encapsulate that.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. And I think, again, it reminds everyone that we have purpose. Obviously, I work with creatives in my other side and music and everything else. So I work with people who are constantly creative. Tolkien, I heard somebody else, I can't take credit for learning this, but Tolkien called it sub-creators, right? So we are sub-creators, and under the master creator, the master artist, we are all creating these little worlds all the time. We're using the energy and the spirit that He gave us to make things, not necessarily out of nothing, because only He can do that. But He gives us, the nothingness of just a bunch of things and says, okay, hey, what do you want this to be? Do you want to make it a song? Do you want to make it a piece of clay? Do you want to make it a sculpture? You get to decide. You get to set up the image. And so much of that, again, is where God's like, hey, I'm giving you the options to try things, to make things, to take risks. And all of that comes from a heart of God that really does trust His children to make the right decisions, in a sense. So that's a beautiful thing where, like you said, God is, wants us to participate. He doesn't want us to be robots and, just following along some blind path and never really enjoying the journey. And again, is it scary? But that's faith, right? Faith is taking that first step into the water. Like, I don't know if I'm going to sink or swim, but I'm going to keep my eyes on Jesus. And it's a glorious kind of like it's a glorious kind of adventure, I guess you could say.
I want another prayer that came to mind while you were speaking a little bit earlier. When it comes to our will, and sometimes we are very attached to our own ideas and these sort of things, like I mentioned earlier. And I'm just gonna try it my way again, like I said.
Yeah,
But there's this prayer that came to mind. I pray it every day. It's prayer for the acceptance of death. Okay, so it says, and I'll explain why I'm telling this to you. Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, I accept from your hands whatever kind of death it may please you to send me this day, with all its pains, penalties, and sorrows, in reparation for all my sins, for the souls in purgatory, for all those who will die today, and for your greater glory. Amen. So I want to tell you why this came to mind. It came to mind because I pray this in the morning, and so it's like, yeah, God, yeah, I'm gonna accept whatever death you send me. I'll accept it. Yeah. I'm real cool. I'm a Christian. I'm gonna accept the death. And then during the day, something happens I'm not happy with. I'm frustrated with this or that. I didn't get my way, and I don't accept it. And I always think about this prayer. Well, I promised God in the morning I'm going to accept the death that He sends me. This is just a little mini death, just a little mini
yeah,
one, and I'm not accepting it. I promised this morning I'll accept the big death, but I can't accept the little death. What's going on? Like, this is like very, very humbling and humiliating when you think about that. The promise you made. Yeah, God, I'm strong. I'm gonna accept the death, whatever suffering there is. No problem. And then a little annoyance, a mild inconvenience, and I'm like, what's going on? I'm not getting my way. So I think all humans can relate to that, but maybe tell us an anecdote, or share your perspective on the how we're very reluctant. We're eager to make big promises to God, but when it comes to the daily little things, we're not as tough as we think we are. Right?
yeah. I know. I love it. Yeah, right. I definitely hear where you're going. And I could say as a personal anecdote, I mean, there's so many little things that I could point out in my own life, right? Where it could be traffic, or an
Yeah.
example I could give even today is, my wife coming down to church, and I was, worried about my car not working, and my car was having some transmission issues. And so, I really prayed honestly, that God would heal the car. I said, okay, God, you can heal a heart, you can heal minds, and you can certainly heal a transmission. So I said, I'm going to pray that you do this. And lo and behold, last couple of days, the check engine light went off. And I guess this morning, I'm like praising God, and I'm like, thank God, this is going to be $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 repair. And then my wife calls and says, oh, look, my car won't start. And I had to remind myself of that very moment. Okay, God, I cannot stop praising you for the miracle that you did for us not to have this, and then immediately turn around and say, well, how could you possibly let her battery die at the very same moment that I'm praising you for this? And it was just, okay, I have to believe you are in control at all times, right? I cannot pick and choose when I believe you're in control, only when it's convenient for me. And that sovereignty of God, right? I think something that you said, I struggle with, we all struggle with, and kind of like to switch it to the creative side. And many times have felt like, as a writer, as a podcaster, I feel like I cannot grasp all the value. Let's just say the income. Let's be honest, the value, the income, all the work I've put into this, and it's like, it's not happening, God. It's not happening fast enough. I've worked so hard to make this other thing work. And it's a reminder, like you just said, okay, God, does this belong to you or not? In my devotional, I allude to the parable of the 10 talents, as you probably know, right? The 10 talents, where one gets 5 and one gets 2 and one gets 1. And the one that buries it is the one that we always say, oh, see, you should have given that talent back to God. But I think what's telling in that parable is not what he hid, is what he said. Because he says,
Uh,
I knew you were a hard man.
mm,
You gave me this thing. Here, take back what is yours.
mm,
The servant says, all you gave me is yours.
mm,
Servant forgot he belonged to the master,
mm,
not the stuff. The servant belonged to the master. So when I get up in my feelings about
mm,
what God didn't do,
mm.
and what I wasn't able to earn, or what I wasn't able to get, or what I wasn't able to do, there's another thing that points where I said, wait a minute. it's not just the things that I get that I'm annoyed about. I'm really telling God, you made a mistake, because I should be the one, kind of like what you said earlier about our own will. Meanwhile, I belong to him. My creative talents belong to him. My everything belongs to him. I belong to him. So he gets to move and shape me the way that he wants. And so when you run into that, it was like, oh, okay, God, I repent. I'm sorry, because you always have something better for me on the other side of whatever annoyance or thing that I'm giving up.
I was just Googling something while you were speaking, as you brought to mind the when Jacob tried to escape from his father-in-law. I think it was
Laban, yeah.
Laban,
Hmm.
and Laban says, the sheep are mine, the daughters are mine, like everything here is
Yeah.
mine. You know what I mean? That I find that very touching and very beautiful. I can't remember the exact phrase. I was trying to Google it, but ran out of time. But yeah, it's just such a beautiful thing, when we realize, or it's like the other parable of the prodigal son, where the elder brother that was loyal and faithful and
Hmm.
whatever, like
100%. Yep.
he's annoyed, with yeah, it's a big, that's a big part of that lesson, that parable, is the older brother, the faithful brother, whatever. It's like there's so many traps for us as humans, as Christians, in our walk with Christ. It's like, people on the outside looking in at Christianity, they see the hypocrisy, they see how foolish we are, and whatever, but they haven't tried it. Like, I mean, a lot of the anti-Christians, they haven't actually tried it. I think it was Chesterton who said that
Yes.
it's not
I
like
will
it's
agree.
yeah. Is it,
That's the
what's
first
the
quote.
quote? What's
We
the
were the
quote?
same
Tell me.
way. I
Tell me the
love
quote.
that quote. No, I didn't want to cut you off. I was hoping you would say
Tell
it
me.
though.
Tell me.
I'm probably going to butcher it.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
It said the Christian life has not been found unproven. I can't say it right,
Okay, let's
but
Google it. Let's Google it.
yeah, let's get the actual
Chesterton.
quote. But
Yeah,
it's a great
Chesterton.
quote.
Christian life. It, I know the punchline, but
Right,
I
right.
don't want to. I always butcher it. Okay, here we go. The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried.
That's right. Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
genius. This guy was a genius.
No, one of my favorite writers. And again, I need to get back into my reading. I need to get back into my C.S. Lewis and
Yeah,
my Chesterton.
yeah.
I'm definitely a book. I'm a book guy. I'm either, if it's not church, philosophy, kind of that kind of stuff, it'll be, self-help and productivity and stuff like that. Obviously, that kind of like goes similar path of wisdom,
Mm.
right? Just wisdom of nothing new under the sun. So I always try to distill, okay, God, if these business people have some wisdom, it had to come from you someplace. And I always find myself just going back to those phrases, those quotes, those things that people who wrestle with the scriptures, and I've been thinking about going back for my master's,
Uh-huh.
and I'm scared to do anything in theology, but that would be probably my favorite thing, would be just to wrestle with these ideas. That's one of the reasons why, again, like I mentioned, going from being growing up Lutheran, and then choosing to work at a Baptist church for a little while, which was more like a African-American Baptist, and then now in a non-denominational church, which was First Assemblies of God, but now we have much more of a standard Protestant, maybe slightly charismatic bent. I've had to research what I understand in the scripture when we're in worship, because I can't be worshiping and singing and playing music and I don't understand what this church believes. So I read the creeds, I read the statement of faith, I read, the doctrine and the code of ethics. And I had to read all that, because through my life, I've said, okay, what do I really believe? Do I really believe everything they're saying? Yes, they have the three basic tenets, right? Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Trinity, and so on. But there's a lot of more stuff in between the lines that in your faith. There's a lot of things that are in between those lines that, okay, it doesn't mean that the other side is wrong. It's almost like there's another, I don't know if it's Chesterton. It might be Spurgeon. He said discernment is not deciding between what's right and what's wrong. It's between what's right and what's almost right.
Ah.
and so I think that's Spurgeon. I might be wrong. But that's where the line is. It's like, okay, there is a truth, and there are shades of the truth that are distilled as we're trying to learn them. And there's some things that God will not reveal until heaven. Everything before that, we should be trying to figure out.
Yeah, it's tricky. One of my recent guests left Catholicism as a very young girl because her mother was Catholic but not taking communion because the church is very strict about, reception of the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ in what looks like bread and wine. And so, I mean, you can't receive if you're in a state of mortal sin, and contraception is forbidden. So if you're taking the pill as her mother was, you're not allowed to take communion. So she asked her mother, why aren't you coming up for communion? And she said, well, because I take a little pill so I don't have more children. And so this little girl, she said, well, that's not fair. That's not good. I mean, I don't want to belong to a church that's bullying my mother, and mistreating my
Mhm.
mother. So, but what Chesterton said is we don't need a church that tells us we're wrong where we know that we're wrong. We need a church that tells us we're wrong where we think that we're right. So this young girl, she went with her will. She said, "Well, that's not fair." But I forget where it is in the Old Testament where God's saying to the some Jews, "Are you sure it's my ways that are not fair? Are you sure it's not your ways that are unfair? Are you
Yes, I
sure
know.
about
Yeah,
that?"
I know you're talking about.
Yeah,
Exactly,
it's like,
exactly.
again, when it comes down to that, when it comes down to like my will's looking pretty good right now, I could do God's will, but my will's looking pretty attractive to me. I don't know why that is, but my will looks pretty attractive. And it's the same thing with this young teenage girl. Like, I mean, she just followed her own desire. She didn't want to be controlled or whatever. And it's like, there are sexual perverts who leave the church. They leave Christianity altogether because the sexual moralities, they find it stifling, and it's repressing these urges that they have and whatever. It's like, well, are you sure it's God's ways that are unfair? Or is it not rather your ways that are unfair? Like, think about it. Be honest with yourself. So I'm not looking down my nose at anybody. I'm not. I'm as weak as anyone else. Okay. But, by the grace of God, I'm able to admit that, my ways, my ways are not God's ways. It's like, my way is the wrong way. I
Yeah,
like to say,
yeah.
I have this phrase that I've trademarked. It's my way or the highway, right? And the highway is God's way. So it's like
Nice.
we got to
Yeah.
choose the highway, man, because my way sucks. We got to choose the highway. I've got to choose the highway. So it's a little twist on that thing, my way or the highway, which is usually used to say, well, you got to do it my way. But when I use it, it's like I can't do it my way because the highway is
Yeah.
better. Yeah. So
Yep, I love the fact that you noticed it because it's literally the verse that popped in my head that my ways are higher. That's one of the reasons I was going to mention, even when you mentioned this situation with the young lady, is it's sometimes it's the difference between the right and wrong, right? Where, oh well, it rubs up against my desire, it rubs up against my thought process, it rubs up against my, the Bible talks about, obviously it's in Corinthians, about pulling down strongholds, the mindsets, right? The ideas that push against God's will. But then, of course, there's also this drawing of the Holy Spirit, which uses our, not necessarily our will, but uses our emotions, uses what we know and think and can sense to draw him. So I think that, again, it's where we have to sit down and say, okay, I have to check this against a standard, and the standard has to be his word. I feel this, I sense this, I feel this, but in 2 or 3 witnesses, right? So you get a pastor, you get 2 or 3 people who are actually studying, you get a mentor, you get spiritual counseling from people who are actually following, and you say, you check this for me. So in the realm of that person, I would say, to her and to anybody, who else did you speak to? If it wasn't Catholicism, did you speak to 2 or 3 other Catholics? If it was, you were questioning the Catholicism itself, did you speak to 3 other people who understand the scriptures and say, yeah, this is why this thing might rub against you, but there's still some merit to the idea of following a doctrine. There's still merit to, maybe this doctrine may not work for you overall, but I think there's this always coming back to, I think you said it, try being willing to admit I might be wrong, right? And one of my favorite scriptures is where God says to us, come, let us reason together. Though your sins may be scarlet, I'll make them white as snow. But he first says, let's talk about this. If God is okay with reasoning with us, the Almighty God, he's okay with us questioning, thinking. Look at the whole chapter of the entire book of Job. He's not scared of our questions. he's more concerned about us getting the wrong answers if we don't question.
Yeah, the whole faith versus reason, that's the medievals tackled that, the scholastics and everything, and came down firmly with the conclusion that they're compatible and that
Yeah.
it's faith seeking understanding. Even Saint Augustine back in the fifth century knew that it was faith seeking understanding, and we do have the gift of reason. And it is good, and it can give us certain knowledge, for example, of God's existence. And as St. Paul said, I believe in Romans, you'll tell me, they're without excuse who don't conclude that there's a creator
Right,
from the
right. Yeah,
creation,
yeah,
right?
that there is there is, the general revelation, absolutely.
Yeah, the book of nature, it's like, I told a guest recently, it's like, he was kind of upset when I brought this up, that he's going to be without excuse on Judgment Day. And I tried not to be harsh about it. It's just like, it is obvious, like the contingent implies the necessary being, the one and only necessary being, that, the creation does imply the creator. This is not hard, because he was trying to tell me, oh, we don't know, we can't know if God is real. It's like, yeah, you're without excuse. We can know. It's very obvious. I mean, it's you have to think about it. I mean, it's going to require some some thought, but we can't put God under a microscope or anything like that. It's like, it's a little bit indirect, because we're going to have to abstract from the stuff that's around us. But yeah, we can know with certainty. But when it comes to the relationship between faith and reason, I mean, they're dangerous on both sides. Like
Yes,
the
yeah.
rationalism on one side, where it's just like, relying too heavily, leaning on our own understanding, and then the other side is a sort of fideism, anti-intellectual fideism. It's like, we don't trust the intellect, don't trust the intellect. And so in between, there's that both and thing, where there's a back and forth, as you said, and a dialogue with God. And we want to engage. We want to be honest. We want to say, well, look, I don't, I didn't believe in the Trinity or the Incarnation when I became a Christian. I didn't
Hmm.
believe. I told my mentor, who was teaching me, instructing me in the faith. It was just a monk who happened to walk into my place at work. And I said, hey, I just discovered that God is real, and I want to worship him. Can you help me? Teach me about God? And he said, yeah, sure. So he gave me private instruction. He took me to the mass and everything. And I said, well, look, I want to become a Christian, even though up until today I was anti-Christian, but I want to become a Christian so that I can worship God. But I have to level with you. I don't believe in the Trinity. I don't believe in the Incarnation. He said, that's not a problem. I'm going to give you instruction over, several months, and you're going to do your readings, and we're going to talk about it, and questions and answers. And I discovered very quickly that every question I had, there was an answer that was reasonable. And if it was beyond my reason, it wasn't contrary to my reason. If you get what I'm saying,
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. That's
for
a very good way
example,
to put it.
all the mysteries, it's like, it's not contrary to reason, but I can't prove it. I can't prove the Trinity, but it's not contrary to reason. So all of this to say that we have to be honest, just as I was honest, and that allowed me to take the steps and to keep an open mind and to eventually say yes, 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 yes to everything. And I always flash this on the screen. It's one of my favorite books. It's just Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma, and it's got 426 odd dogmas in it, certain beliefs that we can't doubt as Catholics. And, I cling to those, but there's a lot in between. And the real walk with Christ is not a rigorous Pharisaical thing. It's the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. So yeah, it's really interesting, that question of faith and reason. What do you have to say about it, and how do you strike that balance?
Well, it's interesting because even when you mentioned the ideas of um, where reason fails, right? So,
Mhm.
and the empirical evidence versus the, like we, it's very obvious to anyone that we all deal in faith. There is no way to
Yeah,
live in life without having faith.
yeah,
You have faith that you're going to take the next breath. You have faith that the car will start. You have faith in the driver that you'll never see in the bus or in the plane or whatever. And so we all exercise faith consistently simply to be existing. You
oh yeah,
cannot live in a world without this operating in your life. And so it's interesting for me when I go to that, I oftentimes think of, okay, well, Lord, if I actually am, let's say, just in a place of questioning God, and I actually had an interview or kind of like a dialogue, kind of like this with an atheist, on on his show,
Oh yeah.
and and I kind of regret sometimes putting myself in that position because I didn't want to speak for all Christians, right? Because you kind of like can fall flat on your face. But one of the things he kept questioning is like, okay, well, how do you know it's not a alien God or a tree God, or how do you know which God is the right God? And contrary to what I thought I would do, I thought I would lean more on the reasonable argument, right? I thought I would lean on all the different things that said, like you said, like creation and clearly the design, all those kind of things. And you know where I went, which I shocked to myself. I said, you know what convinced me most? And I think I got this from Mere Christianity, but the story of the Israelites. The idea that God would pick such an incredibly small tribe and use that to teach us about himself. I said, God either must be insane to have this, or the most brilliant mind of all time to use this specific type of thing to teach people about himself. And like I said, I listened to myself. I said, this is not a rational argument. This is, this is not going to convince anybody. But to me, I love what you said about reason. It's not necessarily reasonable, but it's not contrary to reason. And I think Mere Christianity, I remember reading that book, and that was one of the things that really helped me open my eyes to see that, yes, there are some things that are literally, when it says the foolishness of man, the wisdom of God is the foolishness of man. It's foolishness to man. It is. Some of these concepts are foolishness to man. But like you just said, if you run up against to where the finiteness of man, it makes you realize that because we have a finite mind, we end up running into the infiniteness of God. You run to the end of the rope, right? And so I feel like that's what the reason does. We run as far as we can to the end of the rope, and then we realize at the end of the rope, there's somebody holding the rope. That's the best way I can describe it. It's not necessarily that I give up my reason, but I accept my reason as a gift from God. I accept my ability to think and rationalize as a gift from God. And again, leave for him the things that I will have to wait for heaven to learn. The whole questions, why do bad things happen to good people and all those things? It's just, we can wrestle with them or we can live and learn. And I'm just choosing to live and learn. And I guess that's again, I hope I answered the question. I feel like I kind of rambled a bit there.
No. Not at all. No. It's great. And there's so many questions I have for you about the Bible, religion, and your walk with Christ. But I don't really want to miss the opportunity because you're into music. I do want to spend 5 or 10 minutes, if you don't mind, talking about music. And first of all, what's your primary genre? Is it jazz? Is jazz your main thing?
I mean, that's where my degree is, the jazz piano. I now pretty much play whatever, people ask me to play.
Okay.
But yeah, it started in jazz. If people heard me, that's the first thing they'll say, like, oh, you have like kind of a jazzy style or something like that. So yeah, that's still my first love when it comes. I started as a classical pianist, but I couldn't hang with it. So yeah, my degree's in jazz, and that's kind of where you'll find, most of my playing nowadays when I either write or I go out to perform.
I've always wondered, what is the proper, technically correct way to do the jazz hands? Is there like a technique for that? I'm kidding.
Yeah, I would not be able to tell you. I don't know.
I'm kidding. But who are some of your favorites? Like, this is really off topic from religion, but I'm just curious because I want to find out from you if you still love jazz and which era of jazz. For me, it's trad jazz, the traditional jazz, the 40s and that sort of thing. That's what I love. I love that. But what about you?
That's really hard question. It's just like picking your children, right? Like, which one of the eras actually. And I can't necessarily pick a favorite. I could say which ones were most influential. Okay. So the one that was most influential for me was probably the 50s, the cool jazz movement.
Oh, yeah.
Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. That's what literally got me into. I remember the day I first heard So What. I remember I was in my parents' room. My brother had just fallen asleep. We were supposed to be working on his science project. He had fallen asleep. We're all doing his project for him. I'm still mad about that. As you can see, I'm still salty. But at that moment, NPR was playing, and I remember the sound of Kind of Blue coming on. And I just wanted to know what that sound was. And that desire to hear those harmonies, to figure out those harmonies, is what led me through to jazz. So if I don't hear that, if I don't hear cool jazz, if I don't hear modal jazz, if I don't hear, what came out in the 50s with Coltrane and Miles and that sound, I don't become who I am right now. So I have to say that's my most influential period, is that period right between the 50s and 60s.
What about Dave Brubeck? When was he around?
That'd be right around the same area, like right between, I think, don't test me on my music history, but I want to say at the end of the 50s into the 60s. Yeah. So right after Miles, but a little further down, like Modern Jazz Quartet. That was his group. Take Five is the famous piece, obviously.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I
And
would say it's closer to the
Golden
60s.
Brown, that the Stranglers did the Golden Brown. You know that too?
No,
You don't know that? Oh, you got to
I
check
gotta
that out.
find it. No, you can
Yeah,
definitely
you
give me
got to
something to
check that
practice.
out. The Stranglers Golden Brown. I heard that before I heard Dave
Okay.
Brubeck do it. But he's listed on Wikipedia as cool jazz. So that's what you said, right?
Okay. Yep.
And then West Coast jazz and the third stream. What is the third stream all about? Do you know?
I don't know. I would have to research that again. Like I said, like I remember in school
Oh,
studying a
it's a
lot of that.
fusion of jazz and classical.
There we go. The third, and that's where he took it, and that's where a lot of, again, where I was coming from classical is probably why I was able to kind of like sense that. I wasn't studying Brubeck at the time, but I definitely remember, like, I think he has a piece called Blue a la Turk or something like that, and it's very kind of almost mechanical. And it's like it's the thought process, and that's what I love. Some people say, I believe, as I became a pianist, as you can see, like I love reading and I love all those other things, and I think the emotion along with the technicality is a perfect marriage in those styles, where you have to know something about the theory. You have to know how to put this together, but obviously there's also the feel and the atmosphere you create. So I love things like that, where there's a thought process, but also the emotion, where you're expressing something that maybe hasn't been expressed in another like genre.
I'm going to read you 4 points from Cool Jazz Wikipedia. Okay, I just want to get your reaction to it. This is from Mark Gridley, writing in the All Music Guide to Jazz. He identifies 4 overlapping subcategories of cool jazz. Number 1, soft variants of bebop, including Miles Davis recordings that constitute the birth of cool, the complete works of the Modern Jazz Quartet, the output of Jerry Mulligan, especially his work with Chet Baker, whom I love,
Yep.
Bob Brookmeyer, and the music of Stan Kenton's sideman during the late 40s through the 50s, and the work of George Shearing and
Yeah.
Stan Getz. Stan Getz, I
Stan
know.
Getz.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what do you think of that first subcategory there? That soft variants of bebop. Bebop came
Yes.
before?
Yeah.
Bebop came before?
I was never bebop. Not that I wasn't a bebop fan. I was mad at bebop because I couldn't play it. I was so frustrated because when you talk about Charlie Parker and just the incredible mind and the facility it took, I never could master it. I could never master like really hard, what would be called hard bop, right? So you have soft, like you just mentioned, with cool jazz. Hard bop would be more like Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker and these flying fast tunes that were so intricate. And I just found myself just struggling. I was like, and maybe that's why the more space, the more time to consider harmonies. Some of Miles and some of like just George Shearing, and there's some other pianists that would just take hours between chords. And just like you have plenty of time to think of what's next. You don't have to be it's like, nope, one chord and let's let that sit. So I think it might be another reason why I gravitated to it, because hard bop and the 40s bop was just too much for me at the time.
Number 2, the output of modern players who eschewed bebop in favor of advanced swing era developments, including Lenny Tristano, Lee Konitz, and Warren Marsh, Dave Brubeck, and Paul Desmond, and performers such as Jimmy Giuffre or whatever, Pell,
Guthrie, I think, something
and
like
Dave
that.
Pell, who were influenced by Count Basie. I know I like Count Basie.
Yeah.
And Lester Young. I like Lester Young.
Yep.
Small group music. So is this what's happening here? This is like an advanced swing era development? How do you
I
picture this
think
stuff?
if you think of, okay, you definitely testing me now. I remember studying a little bit of Lenny Tristiano, and I think the idea was for that, it was basically evolving cool jazz and evolving it into, like you mentioned, the West Coast sound from Dave Brubeck. And I think each one of these things is just a little bit of a twist. And I'm not going to say like I understand it, because I probably forgot a lot of it. If I go back and listen now, like I used to do in my classes, I'd immediately tell you what it is, because there's something about the way you approach even the swing rhythm. There's something about the way you approach the
Swing is
way
just
is
off. Swing is
yeah,
just
yeah.
off.
If a natural is you might say triplets. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 da, 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 but there's a little bit of a delay
Uh,
on that third that second beat. 1 2 three
okay.
three three,
Okay.
and that is what you hear on the ride cymbal. That's what you hear. Anybody that's talking about swing, that's basically what comes obviously from the 40s and the blues, and everything is really what evolved this whole new sound, was just that ability to have a rhythm that was not exactly written. You can't write swing. Like, honestly,
Ah.
if anyone tries to write it down, they're wrong. It's not, there's no way to actually notate swing.
Ah.
It's felt.
Ah.
And
Ah.
so there's so many different ways to feel it that people can sense right away. Oh, wait, you're not going from, like you mentioned, a Count Basie. You're going more of a laid back, where it feels like you're almost offbeat, or you're going more almost, not metallic was the word I'm looking for, military. It's almost like a more strict swing,
Ah.
but they're all in the middle. And it's just amazing. Again, you can see where there's just so much room for growth and so much room for evolving as a musician. And that's why you have all these little pieces. And that's why people have this argument still. What is jazz? Is it swing? Is it this? Is it that? If you don't have improvisation, if you have a drum machine, is it jazz? So there's so many different ways to say it. And really, it just comes back down to, is it improvisational? Does it have a core of the rhythm creating the moment, the synergy of the musicians? Does it have something that harkens back to the old, but also puts in the new? There's so many different ways to describe it, but I love the fact that you're bringing it up, because I need to go back and study this stuff. It's making me feel like my
Getting you
high school
excited.
teacher, my college teacher is like, Alan, I told you to study.
Ah. I'm putting you on the spot, but I like doing this to my guests. Not about music, but whatever they're interested
Yeah,
in.
no, I love this. It's super, super fun.
Number 3, musicians from either of the previous categories who were active in California from the 40s through the 60s, developing what came to be known as West Coast jazz. So you've already talked a little bit about that. Number 4, exploratory music with a subdued effect by Teddy Charles, Chico Hamilton, John LaPorta, and their colleagues during the 50s. Does that ring a bell, any of that stuff?
No, those names don't ring a bell. I have to go study those guys.
That's more
But no, I did not.
exploratory music with a subdued effect. I don't know exactly what that means. So,
Yeah, I mean, it could be, again, the chord changes. It could be the way that they, again, approach the music. You have producers and obviously people like that who would approach a certain sound. Maybe it would be less, like you just mentioned, like subdued. And so I can imagine a piece, if I listen to it, I can imagine like the approach to the song would be not to, what's the word I'm looking for? Not to be in your face, right?
okay,
Something that
more subtle,
that
more
kind of,
subtle.
yeah, more subtle, exactly.
I
Which of
like.
course would be a total departure from the last series, which was all like definitely in your face. Hard bop was all in your face.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorites and one of my wife's favorites is Cannonball Adderley. You know his music?
Oh, he's amazing. He's actually South Florida native, actually.
Oh, no
Cannonball
way.
Adderley. Yes, he actually. I know some of his distant family members are still down here. Some of the Outerleys are still in the South Florida area.
They say that he does hard bop, as you said, but modal jazz, I don't know what that is, and soul
That's
jazz.
that's that's similar to we just mentioned with Miles Davis. So
Okay.
modal goes into kind of the cool jazz. So he played on both.
Okay. Okay.
Miles wanted Cannonball. He wanted different flavors in the same soup. So he brought in a hard bop player as he presented modal jazz. Yeah.
What about what's that guy? Is it Art Blakely? Is that the guy's
Art
name?
Blakey. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Art
the Jazz
Blakey.
Messengers. Yeah, drummer. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a drummer, right? What was his style? I guess
Yes.
I could Google it. Art
Yeah. He
Blakey.
was also hard. He would also be considered hard bop of like serious swing. Like everything he did was much more like blues influenced, rhythm and blues influence. He was one of the masters of that style. So again, less cool, more aggressive, for lack of a
aggressive.
better word. Yeah.
Well, the thing about music, for me personally, it's not, to me, it's not really about the rhythm. It's not really about that energy. To me, it's really about a melody that I can whistle that gets stuck in my head, and I just love the
Hmm.
melody. So, I mean, I don't know if I'm unusual in that way. The other thing is with music, I don't care about lyrics. I really don't, and I can't hear lyrics. I have a problem where I just can't hear the lyrics. Like the guy could be singing clearly, but it just doesn't process. What I'm processing is the melody, you know. So yeah, I like, elements of all the other elements of music, but to me, it's about melody. So can you just sort of talk to me a little bit about the relationship between melody and the other components of music? What is melody the number one thing? Like, is it as it is for me, or what?
I think it was a great question, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned that because I'll go one step further. Something I have to remind myself, even at church and in some performances, is that there's about, I think, I don't know what the right percentage is, but 40-30% of people aren't really moved by any of those. They aren't moved by melody. They're just not musically moved, and it's a psychological thing. There's just not. They're not, like you just said, that lyrics don't really process with you. I'll be playing in church, and we're very, expressive congregation. We have a lot of, like, CCM and hard, like great music that's, like, designed to make you move and to clap and dance. And then I'll see someone with his hands folded,
White
and I
white
have
guy.
to.
It's a white guy.
No, not sometimes, but not always. We have a lot of Latinos in Miami, and there's still some of them, like, I don't dance, I don't sing, I don't do that, I don't do that
What?
sort of thing. And so when I look at them, part of me wants to be the judgmental Christian of, oh my God, you should be praising God. And then the other part is, maybe this just doesn't move you. Maybe you're here cerebrally. Maybe you're here intellectually. You just want to hear the word. You want to hear someone talk. The music, the rhythm is not going to move you. So there's a certain part of the population that is exactly like you said. They're not moved by any of them. Now, in terms of which ones I feel are most influential,
Mm.
I'm going to lean to melody, but that's not the only thing, obviously. I don't think there's one you could pick. I write, because I'm an instrumentalist, I struggle with lyrics in terms of being a writer. I don't write lyrics. And I pay attention to lyrics as a pianist because I have to accompany the singer. So I need to be able to frame the lyrics and make them sound pretty and make sure I know that I'm accompanying the person. But for me, I'm going to lean more on the melody because, like you said, I want to be able to sing it. I want to be able to sing since I play an instrument. If I just play a bunch of things that people can't sing, they're not going to relate to the song. So I'm always looking at melody as one of the core things. But of course, rhythm, like I said, you can't go without rhythm. It would just be wavy music and just kind of like us floating around. Exactly. So rhythm is literally in our bodies. It's our heartbeat. It's the way we move, the way we talk. Babies, they immediately respond to rhythm because they hear the heartbeat of their mother. So all of that is, like, I think, it's synergy again, like that
Yeah.
word keeps coming back. So I can't tell you which one again is most important, but I can tell you that if I was to write a song right now, I would start most likely with a melody or harmony.
Mm.
I would start with what's the feel of the song, or what's the thing I'm going to remember to sing or say or to repeat that creates, like, this thing that, oh, I can hang my hat on that. I can remember that. Something that actually
Cool.
means, and so, yeah, I think every person is different, though, the way they respond to music.
Well, I interviewed yesterday a rock drummer, a female. She's part of Zepparella, which is a Led Zeppelin cover band. They've been doing it for 20
Cool.
years. Okay, she's a drummer, and she told me, oh, I'm a singer songwriter too. I got my own project, and I'm thinking, oh, cool. So you mean you pick up your guitar and you write a song? She's like, no, I sit at the drum kit and I come up with rhythms. I'm like, what? That's how you start making a song? Well, that doesn't make any sense to me, but
All right.
that's how she does it. That's weird. Is that weird?
No, it's not weird at all. And again, you have to remember, this is how people approach the way they hear, the way they synthesize an idea. I will be playing along, and so I'm not a drummer, but sometimes I will hear a little rhythm. You'll hear something that kind of, ooh, that would be cool. And then you add the layers. It's kind of like, can't really equate to a recipe because I know recipes, you have to start with certain things, right? But I'm pretty sure if you're baking a cake, you could start by mixing the flour, or you could start by mixing the milk. You could start by mixing the sugar. You could, as long as the ingredients get into the cake at some point in the right, amounts. I don't think
Proportions.
you're going to be punished if you start with liquid versus dry, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to get it in the cake? So I think those are, all these components fit. And it's been interesting you said that, just came to mind. And I'm literally telling you this, the first of any podcast. I recently re-released some of my music that I wrote back in 2014. It's a jazz/fusion CD. and I released it on what's a new podcasting application. So we're releasing our music via podcast. It's really cool. There's new technology that's
Ah.
coming out. So I was able to release my music just as a simple one podcast feed track. So imagine my music, but just being in a podcast app. So
Oh.
I released it. Now, all the other apps, songs on this app are all vocals, right? All of them are vocals. All of them have melody, and you mentioned lyrics, and they're great singers. But my song got a lot of support to the point that it was the number one supported song
Ooh.
as an instrumental. I was
Ooh.
like you. I was like, what? I just assumed that instrumental music, jazz, whatever, was always going to be at the bottom. And yet I proved myself wrong because people liked the melody of the song.
Yeah.
So it's called Not Far Away. If you want to find it, you can actually find it on a podcast app. It's called a modern podcast app. So you may not find it on Apple or Spotify because those are not modern podcast apps. These are new apps that are coming out. And I'm literally trying this. I'm telling you for the first time.
Cool.
This is not me trying to sell the song. It's literally something I'm doing experimenting on for the first couple of weeks. And I was blown away by this.
I'm going to check it out.
To prove but I'll send you a link if you want something like just to show people, because I'm learning about this system. All that to say, an instrumental song caught people's attention in a sea of vocal melodies and lyrics. I didn't think that was going to happen. So clearly melody matters to people.
Yeah. Cool. I just want to throw a couple things out there and see what you like. I really like I grew up with the Art Ensemble of Chicago, and later I discovered Don Cherry. You know, I love the Multiculti album, and the different stuff that he's done. It's just so colorful, and it's just amazing, and the people he's worked with are amazing, you know. And so this is a little bit more free jazz fusion. It's saying avant-garde jazz. That's what it says on the Wikipedia page. You agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I would say I didn't listen to much. It's funny you mentioned Chicago because my wife is from Chicago. I don't know if she knew. She was listening to that kind of music at the time. She was probably listening to house. But
do you know the Art Ensemble of Chicago? Do you know that?
I've heard the name. I'm not familiar with them. It did ring a bell as soon as you said it, and that's one of those groups that I really probably wanted to dig into and just didn't have time.
Check it out. Yeah, it's a bit weird because it's a lot of the little fancy percussive instruments, you know, like that. It's experimental and it's a bit odd, but that's what I like.
No, but that's what I like about, like, I am definitely one of those people that I always tell people I'm genreless. I like good music, period. If it's good, I like
genre fluid. That's the modern way to say it.
Very dangerous room, right? Very dangerous word to use. But if you have to use it, that's what it is. I am multi whatever. There's a spectrum. I'm the spectrum of genres.
You're a swinger, and you're
oh gosh, okay,
polyamory. You love all kinds of music. You're polyamorous.
Oh god, yes, musical only.
I'm gonna get you into trouble. I'm gonna sample this.
I'll make sure my pastors are not listening.
One other thing, a couple other things I want to bring up with you. One is my wife's in love with the African music, African sort of jazz, folk, blues. You know, the I think it's West African. I'm not sure. But you know, we've been listening to these songs, and it's just so melodic, and it's of course the percussion and the drumming. It's like it's unbelievable, you know. So, what do you think about Africa and the music that they're putting out? And you know, you're African American or whatever it looks like. So, what's what's the deal there? Do you know your roots? Like, do you have history, or was your history erased by the white man, or what?
Oh gosh, no. I love the thought process whenever it comes to people like, okay, is it African American? Is it Black American? You know, I don't subscribe to the labels much.
Yeah.
I am very proud of my culture, very proud to be Black American, African American, whatever you say. And I'm very blessed that my parents, and well, actually my mom's side, we have a African American history professor who has been in Ivy League school. She has traced us all the way back to 16 generations. So I know my great grandmother and grandfather was Isaac and Georgiana Williams from Georgia. One was a mulatto slave, Cherokee mixed. And so I have many African Americans don't have this, as you can probably guess, the real ancestry. And she has also been to Ghana. She's been to Liberia. So has my mom. So we have made connections in Africa to kind of just study where we're from. That being said, I just love the music. I just love the culture. I still listen to my gospel Afro pop to work out. Just the as you mentioned, the percussion, everything we get from jazz came from Africa originally. The call and response. It is really the roots of where, American music became what it is, along with the European, along with the Irish, along with all those other influences. It wouldn't have happened without African music. So yes, I'm a big fan. Hugh Masekela back in the day, I used to listen to his records. Trumpet player, was a super famous, kind of like along with the kind of like the genesis of what you might call African jazz. And still enjoy like listening to artists from there. So yeah, it's definitely a big part of where my influence comes from, even though I don't necessarily follow individual artists.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm just looking through my playlist now with some of the music that I've bought over the years, and it seems to be okay. There's Nigerian blues. That's like a
Hmm.
compilation album I have. Ghanaian blues from Ghana. I got Ghana and Togo compilation. It's called African Shockwaves. I got Balake Sissoko. He's appearing many times here. Boubacar Traore. I don't know if you know any of these people by name,
Yeah, not the specific names, no.
but it's so funky and cool and catchy, and it's very diverse, very diverse. Like some of it sounds like
100%. Yeah, people forget about the continent of Africa and they just say, oh, Africa. Like, no, like there are I mean, it's literally the most diverse. I could think continent. I can't think of more of a place that has more countries, right?
yeah,
In that particular subcontinent. That is just, it's so much to study there. And that's one of the things, like, even as you ask me these questions, I'm so glad I have, hopefully the next half of my life as I'm turning
yeah,
50 this year. So hopefully I have another few years left to study all the stuff I didn't have time to study and
yeah.
to learn. Like I want to be a sponge. Musically speaking, I want to adopt as many of these styles into my music as possible as I create, because like each little drop, it doesn't stay, but it just kind of fertilizes, right? And it informs the rest of what I play. So what I might be playing might be from a Nigerian blues or something I won't remember, but it'll get in there somehow, right? So
Very
I
cool.
always love to just absorb and listen to anything. Even right now, I'm like, my playlists are totally eclectic. You'll go from rap to blues to classical to gospel to rock. Like I don't,
Ah.
again, like we said, a fluid thing.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to touch briefly. This will be my last music question, okay? And we'll have
Sure.
we'll have to wrap it up. But I'm a big fan of prog rock from the early '70s, particularly in
Hmm.
England. It's sort of a niche market, and it's got a bad reputation for being pretentious and taking itself too seriously, and people find the music annoying and whatever. But I just like it because there's a certain experimental thing. It was called, at the time, it wasn't called progressive, it was called underground, because they
Hmm.
were experimenting and they were opening up. They came out of the psychedelic era, late 60s, and they're like, let's see what we can do. Like, let's bust this thing open. And there was a lot of freedom from the record labels. They were also, high on drugs too. The businessmen were high on drugs too, so everything was kind of open. And I remember Vandergraaf Generator is one of my favorite bands, and their music director, that was supposed to be like the heavy guy from the suit from the record label that's supposed to make sure they get a good record. He was just like on drugs, and he was a full on Satanist. So they got no direction whatsoever from their record company, and they just did whatever they wanted to do. And the dark side, obviously, of Satanism and all that sort of stuff, I'm not condoning any of that, or sex, drugs, and rock and roll. None of that I condone. But when it comes to experimentation, when it comes to freedom, when it comes to bringing in jazz, bring in blues, bring the blues was already there, but bring in classical elements, bring in soul elements. It was so magical, and yeah, it was a train wreck a lot of the time. But it was just so beautiful to see people experimenting, and the looseness of it, the chaos of it. And so I just wanted to get I wanted to gush a little bit about it, and I wanted to get your feedback. Are you aware of that era, and what do you think of that?
I'm not as familiar. Again, it's one of these things where I heard a little bit of Rush, and then I've heard about. I think it was Emerson. What was it? Emerson
Lake and Palmer?
Lake Palmer. So yeah, so I was aware of that style, and obviously with the keyboard and electronic stuff, I was always told like these were the masters. These were how they integrated all the technology started to come out of that era, right? So I didn't necessarily study it, know it at well. I just was more kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I was kind of like a fly like admirer from a distance.
Ah,
of just what I was hearing from it because I knew it was crazy musical, right? I just
Yeah.
remember that part. I
Yeah.
remember saying like, whatever these guys are playing, it is kind of like Bach behind a,
Yeah.
behind
Yeah.
behind an amplifier and a bunch of cool instruments and creating like these crazy cool things that I didn't necessarily, again, I didn't grow up with, so I didn't necessarily know them at the time. But it's interesting you said that because I as you were talking, I was thinking of how eclectic your musical tastes are. You've mentioned
Uh,
African, you talked
yeah.
about prog rock, you
Yeah.
talked about all these different things. And I was thinking, is my community of musicians as eclectic? I was like, wow, like, yes, like I know people who love hard rock. I have some bass players that are like, and country music and all these other things. And I was like, wow, maybe my community, my God and Gigs community, they reflect this same thing where we don't draw lines between, well, you're a rocker or
Mm,
you're a prog rocker or you're a
mm,
rapper or you're like,
mm,
okay, I can't talk to you. Like there's this very, I guess I could use the word inclusiveness, right?
mm,
So I've always had that inclusiveness musically. It's why my program got in gigs in the community. It's why I've always welcomed any kind of musician, any kind of artist, any kind of thing, because I don't know it. Like I said, like you just mentioned, I don't know that music, but I know I can learn from someone who knows it. I can learn from you. I can still become more aware of these different kinds of music, and it will inform me. And it just keeps my ears open. It keeps my mind open to never close that off. So that's one of the reasons why that's why it literally brought up to mind when you were talking. It's like, you know what? I'm so glad that I'm in a place where I can be open to these different kinds of music, and I don't have to feel like I've reached the end because I'm a jazz musician or I'm a church musician, right? And like
mm,
there lies it and go no
mm.
further, right? So yeah, that's what I've tried to create in our community of musicians, and that's why I'm glad. I'm glad that I haven't learned everything. Definitely, it's
Yeah.
possible to learn all the music that exists in the world, and I'm just getting started with it. So yeah, good to know
Yeah.
somebody else I need to study.
There's so much wild stuff in classical. We didn't even get into that. We don't have time for today. But I want you to close off. I want you to talk about God and gigs because I don't actually know what the project is. I have no idea. So tell me what you're doing.
That's okay. No, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. And the reason I bring it up is because everything we talked about, we started with faith, right? And then we talked about music. And literally, you just led me right down the path that this is what I do now. I wrote a book called God and Gigs: How to Succeed as a Musician Without Sacrificing Your Faith. I was a musician, as I've been saying, in a church. Then around 2009, God said, oh, you know what? You should resign from being a full-time minister, and did not tell me what to do next. So I resigned from full-time ministry, and all I had left was my jazz degree. So I became a part-time everything musician, and I was playing. And then eventually I got back into, as I mentioned, my current church where I'm still performing, I'm still ministering, I'm still doing all the things. And I was kind of like, okay, well, how do you navigate this world without feeling like you're going to go to hell every time you play a song that doesn't have Jesus in it? And so that's what I did. I started to talk to people. I interviewed people who work with Julio Iglesias and John Cicada and Take Six, and who tour with Pink and Backstreet Boys. And I interviewed all these people and I put them in the book.
Wow.
And then I started a podcast in 2016. That's been obviously 8 years. I can't do the math. 8 years now, or 7 years. I've been podcasting and building a community of musicians, creatives, and artists who want to become the creatives that God created them to be, working in the mainstream art and entertainment space. So thank you, because you gave me time to talk about both. I talked about my music and I talked about how I grew up as a faith. And that's where I ended up right now, David, with God and Gigs. That's what I do now. That's my entire platform. And they can find all about it at godandgigs.com.
Very cool. Wow, that is so cool. I mean, I'm proud of you that you had the courage to do that because, a lot of Christians are scared, especially Protestants, that the Catholics are a little bit more loose when it comes to, you know, um, tight rules about drinking or smoking or dancing. Some of the Protestant communities are very uptight. No dancing, no smiling, whatever. But we're a little bit more like Chesterton with his cigars and his wine. And it's like whiskey and everything is like not a problem. But we do have to respect God. We have to be careful not to take His name in vain or anything like that, or to offend Him with vulgar talk and stuff like that. And a lot of the music I listen to, frankly, is satanic. It is because that's just a reality that a lot of people aren't on God's team, or they weren't at that time. A lot of young men were in rebellion when they made beautiful rock and roll music. or punk
100%.
rock
Yeah.
music, they were in full blown rebellion. Okay, that's
Yep.
a fact. Let's not pretend that they were good Christians. They were screwing ladies and doing drugs and whatever. So how do I sleep at night when I listen to that music? Well, I sleep at night because I know God created those rebellious kids. He loved them into existence. Christ died for them, and that's not their entire life is not just this rebellious phase that they went through when they created this music. There's a story there from cradle to grave. There's a story for each one of these people, you know. And I hope to see them in heaven. Will some of them not make it and end up in hell? Yeah, that's sad, but that's reality. But is the music that they made, is the music? Because to the extent that it is music, it's godly. You understand? So
Yeah,
everything
I know what you're saying.
everything that we do glorifies God. That's a fact. Some of us are trying to glorify God on purpose, and everyone else is doing it by accident. That's just a fact. So I can glorify God when I listen to some rebel in his youth blowing off steam and whatever. I have to be careful about, pornographic imagery in the songs and stuff like that too. I can listen to a pop song on pop radio and it's like pornographic, and I have to switch the channel because it's too much
Yeah.
sex
Yeah.
talk. I got to be careful with that. It's a near occasion of sin for me because I can picture what they're talking about and I'm going to get all excited, stirring up the lust. So I got to be careful with that. But when it comes to some rocker just rocking out and blah, 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 whatever, like I said, I don't really hear lyrics anyway. So I all of this to say that, I don't feel like I'm offending God when I appreciate music, because music is good, right? And music glorifies God, and I can't judge the music based on like the eternal destiny of the musician, because I don't know the eternal destiny of the musician. I can't assume that they're in hell. Even if it looks bad, like this person lived a horrible life, I can't assume that they're in hell. I have to assume that God had a plan for them and God intervened somehow, and I'll find out on Judgment Day. We can't assume that someone's lost. So that was a big rant, but I'll let you respond.
No, I love the fact that you that's really one of the things that I go right into in the beginning of my book, because I'm talking to the creators of this music, right? So I am one of those people that's on there playing a suggestive song because it's in the top 40 and because I'm in the band that night. And my employer says, yeah, you need to play this suggestive song for this couple or for whatever. And I have to make a choice right there. Okay, God, are you judging me based on what I'm playing? And what you just said is very true in terms of that. Not all music, I would say, is godly, but you cannot have good things, right? All good and perfect gifts come from the Father, right? So the ability to play, the ability to create a love song, the ability to vent steam, to do whatever with music is something that comes from God. I think C.S. Lewis talked about that, like you said, in some point, anything that's excellent eventually had to come from God. If it's produced and created in excellence, even if the content is not excellent, but the ability to make it could only come from God, because Satan does not have power to create. It's only God's power to create, and he gave us that. So that's what I tell my fellow musicians when I'm listening or playing, as you just mentioned, a song that does not honor him. Well, where is my heart? Where's my mind? Daniel is one of my favorite examples, serving in the Babylonian temple. Was he honoring God? Yes, but he was also supporting a regime that had imprisoned his people and put them into Babylonian captivity. He was not a Moses. He did not go to deliver them. The same thing with the captain of the lepers. I can't remember his name. Is it? Gosh, I lost his name. Naaman.
Yeah.
Naaman was healed by Elijah or Elisha, and then says, "Hey, I have to go back and serve my king, the Canaanites. But while I am there, please forgive me when I lean on my staff." He knew who God was, but he had to go back and serve a master. We as musicians, creatives, sometimes we're serving masters that don't love God, just like every employer, every employee.
Yeah.
So what God says is just like what he said to Joseph: honor me as you serve, and everything you touch will be blessed. And so musicians have to realize we are not in charge of the morality of the nation or the morality of every song we play. We are in charge of our own morality. So like you just said, are there times that I've walked away from gigs because I realized that it was taking me down the wrong path? Yes. But when I played those same gigs and earned a living for my family, God did not turn his back on me and say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you played a song that didn't mention me once." That would be saying like all Christians, all plumbers must be Christian, and therefore all toilets must be blessed. Like that's not what we say. We get someone who can fix the toilet as fast as we can. And if that person happens to be a Christian, we're blessing them. If they're not a Christian, it's fine. I just want that thing to work because there's some things in you. So we have to deal with some nasty stuff in the culture. And that's kind of like our job. Sometimes we got to go in there with a plunger and just do it, whether we're Christian or not. But it's necessary for the culture. And we just try to do our best job and honor God as we do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And, there's a principle in the Catholic Church where we talk about the proximity or the remoteness of the sinfulness. And even a cab driver, the example is given typically of a cab driver. He earns his living, he feeds his family driving cab. And he knows that this client, the client tells him, he said, drive me to the whorehouse. It's like the cab driver is not responsible. Like, maybe the cab driver could slip in a little lecture or something. I don't even know if that's appropriate, but maybe say a prayer. How's that? A silent prayer. Maybe that's the best way.
Yeah,
but he's not culpable for this man who's cheating on his wife by going to the red light district or whatever. Drive the guy where he wants to go, right? Take his money, and you're not responsible. And you have to, the cab driver has to love his fellow man, and if he has a relationship with him, he can certainly give him some fraternal correction. But it's tricky. It's tricky. We can sometimes get caught up in what's it called when we're constantly thinking that we're sinning all the time. Scrupulosity.
Okay.
So that's the technical term for it in the Catholic Church. And this is a sin, that's a sin, and everything I do is a sin. Everything I think is a sin, and we have to trust God. Like, I mean, there's a famous Catholic saint, Saint Faustina. She was a Polish nun, and Jesus talked to her and appeared to her, and he emphasized with her the fact that what upsets him is not sin. It's the sinner's heart where he doesn't trust in the mercy of Christ. It's
the redemption.
Refusing to ask forgiveness, refusing to go to him, and just thinking that that God is wrathful and mean and rigid and whatever. It's like, it's the sin is not a big deal. Just like if you have a child helping you cook in the kitchen and the child makes a big mess, I mean, it's because the child's it's just not,
it's a child.
It's just a child.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. Like, it's okay, it's cute. It's cute. I'm not trying to say that sin is cute, but we have to be humble enough to say that I'm nothing, God's everything, and of course I'm going to make mistakes, and don't get obsessed with it, because it's a prideful thing to get obsessed with. Oh my God, I can't believe that I sinned. And well, yeah, of course you sinned. That's who you are. You're nothing. You're a loser without God. God is everything. So yeah, so thank you for coming on and encouraging me with your very sane and balanced approach to music, creativity, and I'll definitely be checking out your jazz thing that you released.
Please, yeah, I would love that. And they can find the best thing for my music is always hard to find because I'm bad at promoting myself. But Alan Paul Music is where they can find the music, and then God and Gigs is where they can find the blog and the podcast and everything regarding to creatives and musicians.
I'm just sorry to interrupt, but my friend Nicola Chrisix here, he says it's the non-dancers that usually sit still during the music. Doesn't mean that they don't like it. But my friend Pick and Choose is here, and he says, "Oh, God and Gigs, I just actually discovered God and Gigs this week." No way. He says he's obsessed with jazz. So that's pretty funny, because I don't have a lot of...
What was the name again? I do think was this on.
Pick and Choose.
I do remember seeing that username. Yes, I do remember catching up with it. Okay,
no way.
Very cool.
What are the odds of that? Yeah, because I got like a very small audience, but Pick and Choose is a friend of the podcast, and Nicola Chrisix, an old good friend. So yeah, cool. That's really interesting. That's God's providence that he showed up here.
No coincidences in the kingdom. Amen.
Yeah. So what would be just a quick little final thought, something positive to leave the listeners with?
Oh, well, number one, David, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a blessing. It's been a lot of fun just being able to open up all these kind of topics and get the mind turning, right? I can see you're a fellow thinker. Like, you love to think and have conversations. So it's really beautiful. The only thing I guess I could say to add to this is to continue that journey that you just mentioned, to continue to seek the Lord, continue to seek good in this world, continue to see this as not, like you said, looking for problems and sins and things like that where I'm falling short, but look at what one of the things from C.S. Lewis in Abolition of Man that one of our pastors has been mentioning a lot is not to cut down forests, but to irrigate deserts. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to irrigate deserts. People don't need more of what they can't do. They need to hear more of what they can do in God, through God, and with God. So I would just say, hey, just be more positive. Where everybody's talking about 24 and recessions and elections, just smile more and follow God. And let's just enjoy more of these conversations. That's all I can add to that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I hope you're going to pray for me and mine. And you're definitely in my prayers. And I enroll each and every one of my guests in a perpetual mass. You're getting the prayers of that daily mass every day, you and your
Thank
family,
you.
okay? So you're
Thank you.
already enrolled in that. And just remember me and mine in your prayers, if you would, please.
I absolutely will. It'll be my pleasure.
And I hope you come back. If you have an open invitation, you can always just book it 4 or 6 months from now, whatever you want. I'm booked until I think April, but
Nice.
just come by and we'll chat some more about music. I got a lot more questions for you, and you can do your homework so that you're prepared
Yes, I can
next
be
time.
ready next. Exactly. I have my prog rock and my
Yeah.
art ensemble in Chicago. I'll be ready.
Yeah, I'm gonna send you a link for the Soft Machine. It's a prog rock group that's very, very jazzy,
Okay.
and I'm very curious to hear what you think about it. So I hope to see you in a few months. Okay.
Awesome.
God
Pleasure.
bless you, my brother.
God bless.
Take good care. Bye bye.